Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
You know, there's a certain silence that comes right after someone tells you they don't believe in you. Not because you failed, not because you've disappointed them, but simply because, in their mind, your existence was never meant to amount to more than a ring on your finger and someone else's last name. That kind of silence isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It doesn't cry. It just sits there, heavy and cold, like a lead blanket on your chest, while you smile and nod and say, "Okay, Mom." It happened on a Tuesday, sometime in April, when the spring air still felt like winter trying to hold on. I had just come home from my shift at the grocery store, tired, smelling faintly of freezer-burned vegetables and sweat, and I finally gathered the nerve to bring it up. College, tuition, help, not a handout, just a conversation. I'd already been accepted, which was the crazy part. I had the letter tucked inside my bag, bent at the corners from being taken out and reread so many times my fingerprints had probably become part of the paper. Full acceptance to a solid state school, not Ivy League or anything dramatic, but a damn good university with a solid program in business analytics. My weird little obsession that had somehow turned into a future. I sat at the kitchen table while my mom scrolled through Facebook on her phone, tapping the screen with those long pink nails she always got done, even when money was supposedly tight. I asked if we could talk. She sighed. I remember the exact way she exhaled, like I was already an inconvenience before I'd opened my mouth. I told her about the program, how much it cost, what financial aid wouldn't cover, and then, very carefully, very politely, I asked if they might be able to help. Just a little. Not the whole thing. Just enough to close the gap so I wouldn't drown in loans before I even started. She didn't look up. She just said, "Rach, be realistic. We can't help you with school. You'll just get married anyway." That was it. That was the full sentence. No hesitation, no apology, not even a fake sugar-coated version like, "It's just hard right now," or "We'll see what we can do." Just a flat, cold verdict like she'd known it all along and was tired of pretending otherwise. And it wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, like she was telling me the sky was blue or that dinner was in the oven. A fact, a given. I was a girl, and in her world, girls didn't need futures. We got husbands, we got babies. And then we shut the hell up about dreams. I remember sitting there, staring at her, not really sure if I should laugh or cry or flip the damn table, but I did none of those things. I just nodded slowly, stood up, and walked back to my room, clutching the acceptance letter like maybe if I held it tight enough, I could keep its meaning alive. 2 days later, too. That's all it took. My mom posted a picture on Facebook that hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. There was my brother Brent, standing in our driveway next to a brand new gleaming black Jeep with his arms crossed like some low-rent Instagram model. The caption read, "So proud of my boy, he's gonna go far." And then a bunch of emojis I won't even dignify with description. She even tagged the dealership. Full-on celebration mode, champagne and confetti, and the whole imaginary parade. I stared at that photo for at least 20 minutes, sitting in my car after another late-night shift, wondering how someone could spend thousands of dollars on their golden child without blinking, but tell their daughter, who'd been working since she was 16 and hadn't asked for a dime in years, that she wasn't worth the investment because she'd just get married anyway. I didn't say anything, not to her, not to Brent, not even to my dad, who'd likely shrug and mutter something about, "That's just how your mom is." I knew what would happen if I brought it up. I'd be accused of jealousy, of making drama, of disrespecting my brother's accomplishments, which, for the record, included getting through 2 semesters of community college and spending every weekend getting blackout drunk with his friends. But he was the future CEO, apparently. The golden boy. And I was what? A placeholder until a man decided to propose? That was the moment everything shifted for me. Not in a dramatic movie scene way, no thunderclaps or dramatic music swelling in the background, but something inside me went steel cold. I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped asking for permission. And most importantly, I stopped believing that my family would ever clap for me the way they clapped for Brent. That dream was over. Instead, I started planning. I applied to every single scholarship I could find. Big ones, small ones, weird ones that required 10-page essays about obscure topics like the social importance of garden gnomes. I worked extra shifts, saved every tip, skipped every party. I stopped scrolling, stopped comparing, stopped wishing things were different. I didn't have rich parents, I didn't have family backing, I didn't have support. But I had anger, I had grit, and I had one very clear goal: to succeed so loudly, so undeniably, that even my mother wouldn't be able to pretend it didn't happen. And I wouldn't give her a single warning, not a whisper, not a preview. She would find out the truth the same way she delivered it, flat and cold, like it was always meant to be that way. In silence, but not yet. That part would come later, much later, when the timing was perfect. Because if life had taught me anything up until then, it was this: revenge doesn't need to scream. Sometimes it's better when it walks across a stage in front of 1,000 people and says absolutely nothing. If you grew up in a house where everything had a pecking order, where even love came with a price tag or an expiration date, you'll understand that the moment I asked for help with college wasn't really the beginning of my story. Not even close, because that conversation was just a final nail in a coffin that had been hammered shut in slow, calculated inches over years of being told to wait my turn, not make things about myself, and never forget that my brother's problems were bigger, more urgent, more deserving of attention than anything I might be feeling or dreaming about. It's strange how quietly resentment can grow inside a person, how it settles into the gaps where trust used to live. Until one day you realize that you're not even disappointed anymore. You're just done. Growing up, Brent wasn't a bad kid, not in the traditional sense, not the kind you worry about getting arrested or coming home stoned or with a baby on the way. He was charming, handsome in that annoyingly casual way that made teachers look the other way when his assignments were late. And when he smiled, adults seemed to melt like they were being let in on some secret joke. My mom always said he had the kind of personality that opens doors. And maybe that was true, but what she never said, what she never even admitted to herself, was that she was the one who kept handing him the keys. If he needed money for a school trip, it appeared before he finished asking. If he crashed his car, twice by the way, the insurance was covered, the repairs handled, and the new set of tires showed up like magic. He never had to fight for anything because she fought for him by default. And me? I was the one she loved in theory, the one she worried about only when it didn't cost too much, the one who heard "I'm proud of you" so rarely that it started to sound like a foreign language, something spoken only in other families' kitchens. I remember once in 8th grade, I spent weeks putting together a science project. Real effort, late nights, building something with my own hands instead of copying it off the internet like most of the kids did. I ended up winning first place at regionals, not just school, but district-wide. And I came home with this oversized ribbon and a plastic trophy that looked like it came out of a claw machine. But still, I was proud. I walked into the house holding that trophy like it meant something, like maybe this time she'd look at me with that soft pride she always saved for Brent. Instead, she barely glanced up from the stove, said something like, "Oh, that's nice. Can you set the table?" And that was it. Nothing about the effort, the win, the judges who told me I'd be good in engineering, just another thing that happened on a Tuesday. Later that night, she spent an hour telling Brent how handsome he looked in his football jersey. Now, don't get me wrong, I know parents aren't perfect. I know moms get tired, stressed, and sometimes stuck in old ways of thinking. But what I learned over and over again in that house was that love wasn't something you earned with effort. It was something Brent got by default. And I had to beg for in tiny, humiliating doses that rarely came. I started to keep my wins to myself. Aced a math test, I didn't mention it. Got selected to read at the school assembly, I let my teacher clap and never told my mom. The less I expected, the less it hurt. When high school started, the divide grew sharper. Brent was already working part-time at the auto body shop a friend of my dad's owned. He mostly stood around and flirted with the receptionist, but every dollar he made was matched by my parents to teach him responsibility. I applied for a hostess job at a local diner, and when I got it, my mom told me not to let it get in the way of finding a husband someday, which felt like a joke, except she never laughed when she said it. Every dollar I made went toward my own clothes, my school fees, the occasional textbook, or bus pass. When Brent wanted to go to Cancun for spring break, my parents paid half and called it his reward for staying on track. When I asked if I could get help with a prep course for the SAT, my mom said, "If it's meant to be, you won't need a fancy class." You learn not to fight it after a while. You learn to play small, to lower your voice, to work twice as hard for half the notice. And somewhere in that constant bending, a part of you breaks off and hardens into something you don't recognize. Something cold, something hungry. I think that's where my ambition was born. Not out of inspiration, but out of starvation. I wasn't reaching for success to feel proud. I was chasing it so I wouldn't disappear entirely. By the time senior year rolled around, I had made peace with the fact that my accomplishments would always be background noise in that house. I never expected them to cheer for me. What I didn't know then was that being invisible has a certain power, because when no one's watching you, no one sees you building, no one sees you planning, no one sees you plotting every damn detail of your escape. And when they finally turn their heads, the entire skyline of your future is standing tall in the distance, and it's too late to pretend they helped build it. So yes, when I sat at that table and heard her say she wouldn't help me because I'd just get married anyway, I didn't cry because that wasn't new information. It was just the first time she said it out loud. It was the first time she stopped pretending there was a future for me beyond wedding photos and baby showers. It was the first time she admitted that she never saw me as someone with a mind worth investing in. And in that moment, something terrifying happened. I stopped trying to prove her wrong for her sake. From that point forward, everything I did, every scholarship I chased, every hour I worked, every test I aced, was for me and me alone. Because once you realize your dreams were never supposed to fit in the walls you grew up in, you stop asking for space. You build your own damn house. And I was just getting started. There is a particular kind of satisfaction, quiet, heavy, and almost medicinal, that comes not when someone tells you they believe in you, but when you stop needing them to. When the need for approval drains out of your system like poison, and all that remains is a relentless, sober clarity that tells you no one is coming to save you, and so you save yourself. Not out of heroism, but because you've seen what happens when you don't. That's where I found myself in the months following my mother's pronouncement that helping with my education was pointless because I'd just get married anyway. And in that silence, after the rage cooled, after the hurt stopped flaring like a second-degree burn, there bloomed something sharper than ambition, a kind of personal vengeance that doesn't seek to punish so much as to prove, not with words or confrontation, but with undeniable, glittering proof that forces even the most dismissive to look you in the eye and see what they tried to ignore. I had made a list, not metaphorically, not in the poetic sense. I had physically made a list, scribbled in a cheap notebook I kept hidden under the mattress in the room I once shared with my childhood dreams. Every scholarship I could find, every grant that didn't require perfect SAT scores, every fellowship for first-generation students, every niche award designed for left-handed descendants of veterans with asthma. I applied to them all. Each one a small act of defiance against the limitations that had been drawn around me since birth. I spent nights at the public library, weekends in the back room of the diner where I worked, and early mornings hunched over my laptop in the corner of our living room, half hoping my mother would glance over and ask what I was doing, just so I could not answer. What people never tell you about clawing your way into college with no money and no emotional backup is how demoralizing the process can be. You write the same essays over and over, twisting your pain into something digestible, packaging your trauma into catchy introductions and heartfelt conclusions, begging strangers to believe in you when your own blood never did. You lie when you need to, stretching volunteer hours, exaggerating titles, tailoring your voice to sound humble but not pathetic, proud but not arrogant. And all the while, you're working late shifts, missing sleep, eating dollar store noodles, and drinking instant coffee that tastes like regret. Because there's no room for error when failure means staying exactly where you are. Then one Tuesday morning, with my phone at 5% battery and a pounding headache from the overnight shift I had just finished, I opened an email that stopped everything. The subject line was so plain, award notification, that I almost deleted it without reading, but I clicked. And there it was, a full scholarship, tuition, housing, books, a complete ride to one of the best programs in the state. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, afraid to blink, afraid the words would vanish if I exhaled. I didn't scream. I didn't jump up and down or call anyone or post it online. I simply took a screenshot, emailed it to myself 3 times, printed a copy at the library, folded it neatly, and slid it into the back of my notebook. It was done. I had what I needed. I moved out quietly that summer. No drama, no announcements. Just a slow packing of essentials. Thrift store suitcases, half-worn sneakers, secondhand notebooks, and one final stiff goodbye at the front door. My mom didn't ask where I was going or why. She assumed, I think, that I was following some boy, or that I was taking a gap year to figure things out, as she liked to say about girls who didn't go far. Brent had just dropped out of his second college, citing burnout after a grueling semester of beer pong and failed midterms. But no one seemed particularly upset. My parents said he needed time. I, apparently, needed a husband. The university dorm felt like another planet. I had never been in a place so clean, so full of strangers with laptops and goals and expensive headphones they wore like armor. I kept my head down, took the hardest classes I could manage, and spent my weekends in the computer lab, while others partied on rooftops. I wasn't there to make friends or memories, or decorate my room with fairy lights. I was there to make damn sure I never had to ask anyone for anything again. One evening, deep into my sophomore year, while finishing an analysis project on market segmentation models, I got a text from my mother. We hadn't spoken in months, just the occasional cold birthday message or forwarded meme she sent without comment. This time it was different. She wrote, "Your brother wants to know if you're coming home for Thanksgiving. Let me know. No, how are you? No, we miss you. Just logistics." It was so on brand I almost laughed. But something inside me shifted. I said yes. Not because I missed them, not because I wanted to smooth things over, but because I had finally built something they couldn't ignore, and I wanted them to see it up close, even if I had to serve it cold. I arrived that November wearing thrifted clothes and carrying a backpack full of textbooks, stepping back into the house like a ghost of someone they thought they'd already buried under indifference. Brent was lounging on the couch with a beer in his hand, pretending to scroll through job listings while complaining about how hard it is out there. My mom was in the kitchen, humming along to Christmas music, acting like we'd just spoken yesterday. No mention of where I'd been or what I'd been doing, just a strange, hollow hospitality. At dinner, she asked me, with that fake brightness she reserved for guests or polite strangers, if I was still doing that school thing. I looked at her, not with anger, not even with sadness, but with something deeper, something surgical. "I'm working on something bigger," I said. She blinked, tilted her head like a cat hearing a strange noise, and nodded as if I had just said I was doing yoga or had taken up scrapbooking. And I knew then, without doubt, that the only way to make her see me was not by telling her anything at all. No, that would come later. Not over turkey and mashed potatoes, not over small talk and fake smiles, but in a room full of strangers, beneath stadium lights, with a microphone in my hand and her name sitting somewhere in the audience, buried under layers of selective memory and polite denial. Because when you've been denied acknowledgement your whole life, the only thing that comes close to healing that wound is making the truth so public, so undeniable, that even your enemies have to clap. By the time I reached the final year of college, the grind had fused itself into my bones so deeply that I no longer registered fatigue or sacrifice as extraordinary. Waking up before sunrise to review lecture slides, working part-time jobs on the weekends to scrape together bus fare, skipping social events, dating, or anything remotely resembling a normal life had simply become the default rhythm of my days. And though it left me often alone, there was a strange and quiet peace in knowing that everything I had, every inch of progress, had been earned not with handouts or applause, but through an unflinching commitment to becoming someone entirely self-made. I had, without ever consciously intending to, made myself invisible to the world I came from, not in a way that felt tragic or lonely, but in a way that gave me power, because as far as my family was concerned, I had simply disappeared into the background noise of adulthood, someone to be mentioned briefly in casual conversation, an afterthought in the grand narrative of my brother's revolving list of second chances. My mother had taken to texting me sporadically over the last few semesters, always with the same breezy, performative cheer that made it clear she either didn't remember the last time we spoke or didn't care to acknowledge the gaps. She would send me photos of Brent standing next to the Jeep with new rims, or pictures of a family dinner where my place was conspicuously filled by one of my cousins, as if to reinforce the idea that my absence had left no hole. The messages weren't cruel, at least not in a direct way. They were polite, even warm in that distant, sugar-coated tone she used with acquaintances at church, but the subtext was unmistakable. She was proud of Brent, and as far as I was concerned, she was still waiting for me to settle down and finally become a woman she could understand. I never responded, not out of malice or even anger anymore, but because engaging in those conversations felt like stepping back into a costume that no longer fit, playing a version of myself I had long since buried beneath a mountain of self-discipline and quiet, calculated revenge. By senior spring, I was carrying a GPA most students would have killed for, leading 2 academic societies, working as a teaching assistant, and preparing a research thesis that would go on to win departmental honors. Yet I told no one in my family. Not a word, not a single text, not a phone call, not a shared photo. While Brent was bouncing between vague business ventures and part-time gigs that never seemed to stick, with my parents posting about his entrepreneurial spirit, I was quietly building an empire of merit, brick by brick, without witnesses. It wasn't that I didn't want them to know. I just didn't want to give them the satisfaction of being part of it. Not after years of being told, in one form or another, that I wasn't the type of girl who went the distance. I didn't want their congratulations. I wanted their silence. And when the moment came, I wanted their shock. It was sometime in early April, roughly a month before graduation, when the message arrived. I was walking across campus, listening to a podcast on behavioral economics, when I saw her name on the screen. "Hey, honey," it read. "Do you know when graduation is? We'd love to come and see you walk across that stage." The exclamation point struck me harder than I expected. There was no mention of pride, no curiosity about my academic work, just a vague, breezy invitation to let them attend the final act of a play they never paid to see. For a moment, I stood there frozen, phone in hand, torn between the immediate instinct to ignore her completely and a darker, more satisfying thought. Let her come. Let her sit in the crowd, in her best floral dress, holding her phone ready to take a picture she could later post with a hashtag about how proud she was. Let her show up believing this was a generic ceremony, that I would simply walk across the stage in alphabetical order, receive a rolled-up piece of paper, and return to my seat like everyone else. Let her believe, until the very last second, that nothing extraordinary had happened here. And then let her be forced to hear my name spoken by the Chancellor himself, not as a graduate, but as the Valedictorian, the top of the class, the student who had achieved the highest honors in a university of thousands. Let her hear my story. Woven into the speech he would deliver about resilience and excellence and the quiet brilliance of students who had overcome odds not visible on paper. Let her clap because everyone else was clapping, even if she didn't fully understand why. I responded an hour later. Yes, I'll reserve 2 seats. You and Dad can come. I didn't tell her what was coming. I didn't give her a schedule or tell her to show up early. I wanted her to walk into that auditorium with the same smug complacency she had worn my entire life. That unshakable belief that Brent was the star and I was just the supporting cast. I wanted the fall to be quiet and irreversible, not out of cruelty, but because some truths are too big to be told directly. They must be shown, unveiled like a secret painting hidden behind a curtain. As the ceremony drew closer, I kept rehearsing my valedictorian speech, not the words, I had those memorized weeks ago, but the moment. The look on her face when she realized the story being told by the Chancellor was mine. The uncomfortable pause in her breath when she heard the specific reference to a student who put herself through school without parental help, who worked 3 jobs, who applied for 73 scholarships, who built her success not on legacy or privilege, but on sheer, relentless will. In that silence, I hoped she might finally hear me, not the daughter she thought I was, not the future bride she once predicted, but the woman I had become in spite of her doubts. And if she still didn't understand, then at least she would have to sit there and watch the entire room rise to its feet, clapping for someone she never believed in. And that, more than anything, would be enough. Because sometimes the sharpest knife is not anger or confrontation or yelling into the void. Sometimes it's silence, planned, precise, delivered with a smile, and mine was coming, wrapped in a diploma and spoken through a microphone, with her name lost in the crowd. On the morning of my graduation, as the sky hovered in that perfect space between pale gold and overcast gray, with the kind of fragile stillness that makes even the air feel expectant, I stood in front of the mirror in my small borrowed apartment, the one with the leaky faucet, peeling paint near the windows, and the bookshelf stacked with every piece of academic armor I had worn to survive the last 4 years. And I zipped up my gown with hands that were remarkably steady, not because I wasn't nervous, but because everything about this moment had already been lived 1,000 times in my mind, practiced, sharpened, replayed in dreams and daydreams and long walks across campus, while others were laughing about finals being over. The ceremony, in all its pomp and tradition, was supposed to be a celebration, a communal rite of passage, a moment for parents to beam with pride and take blurry photos that would be pinned on fridge doors or posted with well-worn phrases about how fast they grow up. But for me, this was war dressed in regalia, a reckoning 4 years in the making. When I arrived at the venue, an enormous indoor arena transformed into a sea of folding chairs, velvet ropes, and nervous chatter. I found my assigned seat in the front row, marked by a small white card that read, Valedictorian, Rachel Lynn Myers, and I slipped into it with a calm that startled me. Around me, other students fidgeted with tassels, texted their families, or whispered final jokes before the long procession. I sat in silence, listening to the faint hum of the crowd filling in behind us, wondering where in that rising buzz my parents were seated. If they had arrived early, if my mother had curled her hair the way she used to for church, if she had dragged my father along by the arm and whispered to him how proud she was, not because she meant it, but because it would look better if she said it out loud. I hadn't reserved the seats near the front. I had placed them somewhere in the middle, close enough to see me walk the stage, far enough to be surprised when I didn't return to my seat right away. I imagined my mother's reaction when the Chancellor began his opening remarks, his practiced ceremonial tone shifting just slightly when he launched into the story of the student chosen to represent the graduating class. He had read my speech 2 days earlier and told me it was precise, powerful, and surprisingly personal, which made me smile because I hadn't written it for applause. I had written it as a record, a confession stitched in academic language, a quiet roar made palatable for a room full of deans and distant relatives. When he began, the lights dimmed just slightly, casting long shadows across the stage, and the entire room fell into a hush that only comes when everyone knows the climax is near. He spoke of perseverance, of unseen labor, of the kind of student who rose not because doors were held open for her, but because she kicked them down quietly and without complaint. He mentioned working 3 jobs, surviving on instant noodles and 30-hour weeks, nights spent alone in library corners, and scholarships won through essays that read like battlefields. And then he said my name, clear, deliberate, reverent. Please join me in welcoming your class valedictorian, Rachel Lynn Myers. The applause came all at once, explosive, automatic, unknowing. A room full of people who didn't yet know what I looked like stood to their feet out of habit, out of tradition, out of the strange instinct to celebrate someone they had not yet seen but had already been told to admire. I walked to the podium slowly, each step deliberate, not theatrical but purposeful. My gown flowing just slightly behind me, my cap secured tight, my speech folded in my hand like a weapon sheathed in politeness. When I reached the microphone and looked out at the ocean of faces, I saw her, not right away but eventually, my mother sitting beside my father, her expression caught in that middle space between confused recognition and forced poise. The way someone smiles at a stranger they think they might have known once but can't quite place. Her hand was hovering near her phone, her mouth fixed in a soft, puzzled curve. And I knew she had not expected this. Not the title, not the moment, not the way her daughter's name had been uttered with such undeniable weight. I began to speak, not with pride exactly, but with certainty, the way a verdict is delivered after months of evidence, a slow, methodical dismantling of doubt. I spoke about the importance of resilience, not in the poetic sense people use to dress up hardship, but in the brutal, exhausting sense that requires waking up every day and choosing not to quit. Even when quitting would be easier, even when silence would be safer. I spoke about the power of belief, not others' belief in you, but your own, the kind that grows in the absence of applause, in the shadows of indifference. And then, without naming her, I spoke about the girl who had once been told that college was a waste because she'd just get married anyway. And the room, God, the whole room shifted. Like the air itself was holding its breath. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I didn't even pause for effect. I let the words hang in the space between us, raw and unadorned, because I wanted them to land like a stone skipping across still water, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. When I stepped down from the stage, the applause came again, louder now, genuine, not out of tradition, but out of truth. My peers reached for handshakes. Professors nodded with quiet pride. Strangers mouthed congratulations as I passed. But I wasn't looking for any of them. I turned, just briefly, to where my parents were sitting, and I caught her eye. My mother stared at me, her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't quite summon the words. I smiled, small, tight, and final. I didn't walk over. I didn't wave. I simply returned to my seat, my robe settling around me like armor, and I listened as the rest of the ceremony unfolded in the echo of what had already been said, because the truth had been spoken. And sometimes, that's the only revenge you ever really need. But even as I sat there, holding the rolled parchment in my hands, hearing the final names read aloud, I couldn't help but wonder, had it been enough? Had she truly understood what the silence between us had meant, what it had built, what it had cost? Or had she already begun rewriting the story in her head, turning herself into the proud mother of the valedictorian, never mentioning the Jeep, the dismissal, the years of absence? I didn't know. I might never know. And perhaps that too was part of the price, because revenge, no matter how perfect, rarely comes with closure. It just comes with truth, cold, complete, and sometimes quietly devastating.